and then we can then we'll be able to accept people in. There we go.
So what do I do?
So it looks like everybody's coming in. So welcome everybody.
Oh, they're already in.
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to this month's webinar, Governance of Microsoft Teams and SharePoint. We're just going to give everyone a few more minutes to make sure everyone who wants to attend can join.
So I think we could go ahead and get started with introductions there, Lois.
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Lois Batzios. I'm working at CompuWorks and I'm filling in for Jacob today. And Alan, who usually joins us, is also not available today. So it's just myself and Jolynn. We have several upcoming trainings. And the easiest way to register for these trainings is either wait for the email that we automatically send you, or you can go on our company's website, and under company, there's a listing for upcoming training sessions, and then there's a register link there also. But a few of the ones we have are Adobe Acrobat, more about Teams basics, Microsoft Planner, and then SharePoint Beyond the Basics, which would be a nice follow-up to this training too.
Yes.
For anyone who hasn't done one of our webinars yet, we have our go-to instructor, Jolynn, and she will be presenting the material today. If at any time you have questions, you can use the chat to ask the questions, and we monitor them during the presentation. And if we don't get to it during the presentation, we may be able to answer it after.
Yes. So thank you very much, Lois. Hi, everyone. I'm Jolynn. And as Lois said, today's topic is going to be talking about governance with SharePoint and Microsoft Teams. Now, there is a handout that will correspond with the topics that I'll be referring to today. Those will be located in the email that you will be receiving, along with a copy of the recording from today. So as Lois said, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat and we'll monitor that chat to make sure we get to everyone's questions. If you would prefer to wait till the end of the session, we can answer any questions once we get finished as well. But I want to get started by talking about, SharePoint is a program that we use online. We can access it, several different ways. We have Microsoft Teams, which corresponds with SharePoint. They all also work with other Microsoft apps. So when we talk about the suite of programs that we have available through Microsoft 365, we don't want to just release them and let people just kind of do what they want to, so to say, with all of those apps. We want to have a little bit of control over what's going to happen and how these apps are going to be used. Specifically, how people are going to be utilizing the two apps we're going to focus on today, which are SharePoint and Teams. So one of the big things that I get asked is, how do I even get started with figuring out what I should do first before we have people start using these programs? Or what if you said, Okay, everybody started using them, but we never really set up any policies or procedures on how to use them. You could always still set up your governance. Just because people started using the programs doesn't mean you can't kind of pull back and say, okay, we need to come up with some policies and some true guidelines on how we're going to use these programs. If we do not set up policies and procedures, people will be doing whatever they want to do. We'll end up with more headaches because of the fact that people won't, everybody's going to try and learn how to use the programs on their own. There won't be any consistency on how things are going to be set up. Also, we're going to end up having duplicate information. People will not know where I should go to actually find the information that I need. So we want to really kind of get a hold of how we're going to utilize these two programs, SharePoint and Teams. So typically in an organization, and it doesn't matter if you have 5 people in your office or you have 5,000 people in your office, you still should have some governance set up. The one thing that a lot of companies forget to do is figure out who the champions are within your organization that will be helping take care of Microsoft Teams and SharePoint. As you can see on my slide, they're really going to be the experts in their area along with the programs themselves. Now we'll get into different levels of responsibility, who should be responsible for what. But the big thing is start a Word document or however you want to start organizing your entire app of SharePoint and Teams. Really kind of open up a word processing program, start it on a whiteboard, in a notebook, a paper notebook, a OneNote notebook, however you want to do it, start some documentation. Figure out who the champions are in your company. If you have a company that, let's say you have 500 people, you might have a person in each department that actually is the champion for their department. They understand what the department needs are, and they understand the programs, Microsoft SharePoint and Teams, to a certain extent. They don't have to be a developer, the SharePoint or Teams administrator. They don't even need to be in IT, but they will probably be the ones that have the most knowledge in those areas. We call them champions. It's just kind of, and if I have a smaller organization, I might have one champion. If I only have 20 people in my company, there might be one person in my company that actually is the champion for the whole company. We might have our IT services outsourced to CompuWorks and other programs or other companies. So we might outsource IT, but we might have a champion internally that works with our outsourced IT company. So you want to kind of think about who's going to be the person that will be responsible for some of the building and the planning of our apps that we need. So we have this thing that we refer to as governance, that we want to be able to really kind of figure out as an organization, what do we want these tools to do? What are going to be the things that this person or this department will be responsible for? Who's going to be playing which role in the responsibility of maintaining, building, planning all of these different arenas of these apps. So who's the admin? Who's the IT admin for SharePoint, for Microsoft Teams? And then who's going to be the person that's going to design these? Is there one person in IT that's actually going to create the SharePoint sites? And then is there somebody else that's going to be a designer? Then are there champions within each department or team, so to say, that is going to know the information that will need to go into the SharePoint site or into Microsoft Teams? So we need to figure out who's going to be kind of that role for what is needing to have responsibility placed on. The governance side of it is figuring this out as an organization and coming up with some policies and procedures as to this person has these rights, this person has these rights. This person is responsible for maintaining the application, and this is how they do it. This is what they are responsible for. Anybody that is an end user of these apps need to have some understanding as to what these apps are. One of the biggest lacks of knowledge sharing is we don't document things. We need to make sure that we have this all written out and that the right people know what they're responsible for and where they're going to find the documentation that says this is what you are responsible to do. This is what you're not doing. This is what you are doing. And training people so that they have enough knowledge in the area that they're responsible for. We can't just go out and watch one video and say, okay, I think I can set up a SharePoint site, or I can set up a new Microsoft Teams, or I can be the admin to take care of all the background policies and different workflows and different things that go into these apps. We really want to find who's those experts that are going to be able to do the different work that's going to need to get done. So a big part of this is staying compliant with your organizational's policies and procedures when it comes to using these apps, as well as the security side. Some organizations will be needing to be more secure than others. Depends on if you're in a legal situation, you're in healthcare, those kind of things. We always have to be extremely cautious of what information is being shared and who has access to it. So somebody needs to understand that security side of using these programs. I personally do a Word document. And I can show you an example of this. And if you end up wanting to have a copy of it, I'd be more than happy to share a copy. You can also find different templates for documenting your governance, getting started with your governance. You can find different documents available, templates available online. So just to keep that in the back of your mind. The one that I started with came from a website called SharePoint. It's Mavis Beacon, and they are SharePoint experts. It's a company, and they are SharePoint experts, and they happen to have a template that I started with, and I took some of the pieces of theirs and kind of started building my own. So you can see from my navigation pane on the left-hand side all the different areas of subject that I have. So I have site architecture, I have security, I have built in talking about the navigation of a SharePoint site. What about the look and feel of the site? You know, are there certain colors that we need to maintain? Because there are company colors. You know, it's little things like that that people don't always stop and think about. Making sure that we are using images that we own as an organization, and we're not going out and using illegal images, that, you know, things like that. All of that needs to be considered when it comes to the governance side of creating and maintaining your SharePoint and Teams. So you could see I've got several different topics over here on the left-hand side. The retention, any third-party tools, what are we going to do about training? What about the integration with other 365 apps? And who's really going to be the person that is an expert, you know, on the IT side even, who's going to be the expert on those areas when someone has questions or they're having issues? Because we might have an expert in our organization that is a SharePoint expert, but they're not an expert on all the other aspects. Like maybe they're not experts on Outlook or Planner or other apps that correspond with SharePoint and these others. So we always need to know, what are we going to have available? Who's going to be that responsible party? So, can't say enough about documentation. So when it comes to a governance team, this team of people that you can put together, in a smaller organization, the same person might wear multiple hats when it comes to the governance. But if you have a larger organization, there may be different people that are going to be responsible for these specific areas. Like who's going to be the IT admins? Who's going to be the developers if we need any development done? Who's going to maintain, be the expert on workflows? Who's going to be the compliance, or what other entities you need? This is just an example. Your organization may not fit into each of these categories. You need to know what categories you need. What roles and responsibility matrix do you need to build for your organization? Once again, this is something that I found on Microsoft's website. If you look up, and by the way, in your handout, you're going to have a link on the very first page of the handout. There will be a link to Microsoft's website giving you some further information and guidance on creating and maintaining SharePoint and Teams and coming up with your governance plan. Okay. So why is SharePoint and Teams governance important? This could be a whole week of topics. We could spend full days, 5 straight days, talking about why it's important. But the gist of the whole thing is we don't just want to say, okay, yeah, we have Microsoft Teams, so go ahead and start using it. There's things that I'll be showing you that are in the background of both of these apps that we need to really kind of be careful with. Because if we put a document in a document library in SharePoint, who has rights to that SharePoint site? Is this confidential information that we have now just shared, and we have external people coming into this SharePoint site or into this team? We need to understand who needs to have access to what areas. Now, as we continue through the rest of our session today, look at the different tools and the features that we talk about today, and it will help answer the questions as to why is governance important. Some decisions will need to be considered when it comes to your organization and the important side of this. Decisions to consider are who can create a SharePoint site or a Microsoft team in Teams. What about naming? How are we going to determine what's going to be named what? Because we have unique names that get used. We need to know what the files are going to be called that go into our document libraries. Do we have multiple document libraries? Do we have just one document library for every site? Do we have hub sites? Do we have sub sites? What kind of sites are we actually going to be building? Are they communication sites? Are they team sites? What needs to go into each of those? As I start showing you the insides of these two apps, you're going to see why some questions really need to be answered. Some plans need to be made prior to allowing people to go out and make choices on what sites we should have, what Microsoft Teams should we have. We really need to think about what apps each site or team will need to have access to. So will they need to have a third-party app? Do we already have a license for that app? How will that connect? Are there other things we need to consider? Because if we connect it to SharePoint, does it also need to be connected to Outlook? What kind of issues might we run into? We need to think about the content and making sure that we maintain the content that is being put in Teams or SharePoint. If we start just migrating all of our information from network drives into Teams, and then we migrate it from Teams into SharePoint, we can sometimes be more or less shooting ourselves in the foot because we're doing two things instead of one. We might want to step back and say, these files really need to go in SharePoint. We're not going to dump everything into Teams and then move things to SharePoint, because then you're doing things twice. Instead, stop and think about the two of them together and which app should you be using, either as an organization or as a department and or as a team of people working together, like an executive committee, a board, somebody that has a board where you have 8 people or 9 people on your board. What information do they need access to, and where should they go to access that information? We need to think about that security side of things, because security is huge. No matter if you're a 5-person company or a 5,000-person company, data security is extremely important. We are using online software. Teams, SharePoint can be accessed on a mobile device, a tablet, a laptop, a desktop. You can access it from any internet connection. So we have to think about that. Can someone be working from home? And what kind of security do we need if they are doing that? If I have people out in the field, what kind of security will they have? Will they still be able to access the information that they will need? All those things will need to be considered. So when it comes to the individual, kind of that individual, who's going to be responsible for what, we need to think about the roles and responsibilities for org-wide settings, settings that are included in multiple applications. So do we need to add somebody to Azure? Do we need to add somebody externally into SharePoint or externally into Teams? Or is it just going to be internal coworkers? And are there specific coworkers that we want to have access to certain sites and certain parts of certain sites? Because we can, and I'll show you, let me actually show you some examples as I talk about this. So what I want to do is I'm going to actually go into my Microsoft Online account. So I logged into my online account. I'm going to go into a SharePoint site. So I'm going to go to my apps and open up SharePoint. Now, of course, you probably already know there's multiple ways to access SharePoint. If you need to learn more individually about these apps, SharePoint or Teams, we do offer separate sessions to learn more about the programs themselves. Today is more about kind of the backbone of each of these. So I'm going to open up a site, and let me open up this one called, actually, I might want to start with Company Intranet. I'll go into this one called Company Intranet. Now, not every company, not every one of you are going to have an intranet through SharePoint, but this is an example of having a hub site. So think of a hierarchy. When we build SharePoint, we build things in a hierarchy fashion. What do we want people to see when they come to the landing page, to the home page of the SharePoint site? We need to make it quick and easy for people to access the information they want. So I can have different sub-sites that take them into different departments. I could do that by giving them an image to click on, or I can have a menu located at the top left of the SharePoint site. This particular site is called a communication site, where we can give communication to every employee org-wide of quick, easy access to documents, upcoming events, calendars, things like that, any company news. But if I want to go directly into a specific area, a department, I could do that by clicking on a drop down. I could have a menu at the top that says departments, and then I could have a list of all the departments. Mine isn't quite that elaborate right now, but if I just go to the top left and I click clinic, this is going to take me into a sub-site. This particular sub-site is called a team site. So we need to understand, do we create a communication site or a team site? And we need to understand the backbone of what all that means so that we're creating the correct site. And within those sites, what information do we need on the home page, on other pages? What do we need for document libraries or other apps? And what information needs to be seen immediately? So this particular example is showing medical news. So I have news about measles, news for the upcoming year of 2023, COVID information. On the right-hand side, I have quick links to weather. I'm not in Iowa, but I put Dubuque, Iowa on here just as an example. I have some events on the right-hand side. So here's some upcoming events that the whole, anybody that needs to come into clinical can see when they come into this department. Now, of course, there could be additional pages to this site that take people into confidential information where not everybody's going to be able to see it or access it, but maybe only the employees of that specific department can access it. So when we think about the hierarchy of SharePoint, we have our main site up at the top, and then we have our sub-sites, which could have multiple pages to them, or they could have even additional sub-sites. So we have to plan all this out. We can't just say, okay, yeah, go ahead and start making some SharePoint sites, because it's not really that easy if you don't understand what you're doing. So you want to have some general knowledge in some areas. Excuse me. I have a tickle. But on the left-hand side, I have, let's say that I want to go into different documents, and I have legal documents. On the left-hand side, I have a document library that has been created just to store legal documents. They could be PDFs of forms that everybody needs access to. The original templates might be kept in a more secure area just for the employees that actually maintain those files. So you want to take some time and build by planning everything out prior to creating the site itself. And we never invite people until the sites are created. We don't necessarily publish things for everybody to see right away. We want to build it before they come, so it's ready for them to use. You might have a test group of people that are going to help you build it. You'll have somebody that is playing the role of the administrator behind the scenes. We might have someone that is going to do the design aspect. We might have somebody that is an end user that will help us with the testing. So you might have 3 people involved in getting it planned and built. I want to take you into the backbone of the SharePoint admin part, just to give you an idea as to what people really need to be considering when they are actually creating and using these different sites. So I'm going to go back to my login for my Microsoft, and I'm going to go into admin, and whoever is a Microsoft admin would have access to this. So this is not going to be the role of every person in your organization, or it may not even be you, the people here attending, but you would need to understand what happens in the background. So I'm going to actually open up the SharePoint admin so you can see the details that go into the backbone of the program itself. So on the left-hand side, I could see all active sites. So I can see every site that has been created for my organization, and I have several different details, of course, that I can maintain, and I could create new sites from here. So who has the rights in your organization to create new sites? They could, this is one way to create a new site. This is also where I would take a site that I build and turn it into a hub site. So we have to think about who's going to be able to do that, who has rights to get in here. On the left-hand side, we also have settings. So we can go in and we can have an admin setting, the home site settings. We can have retention settings. We can have storage limits. What kind of pages are we going to be allowing? So as you can see on this left-hand side, there's a lot more to just going out there and saying, hey, I want to create a SharePoint site. There's a lot of detail that can actually go into the background of it, starting here with the admin side of it. Under the advanced categories, there's the API access. There's even more features where we can go into the stores where we could say these apps are available. So we have the SharePoint store apps that we could say, yes, these are available, or no, these are not. How are we going to manage our records? All of this is information that someone within your organization will need to understand. They will have the role and responsibility for maintaining things in the background. The same with Microsoft Teams. If I go back to the admin and I open up maintaining a SharePoint site. So if I go back here to the home page and I go into Teams, there should be an admin in your organization that understands the backbone of managing teams. So what active teams do we have? Which teams have been deleted and how to restore them if they've been deleted? How to maintain the users, the different team apps. What about the settings for the meetings? Even if we're going to be using phone calling, what are we going to do about voicemail, and what calling packages are we using, and any other policies and procedures that we need? So we need to really be thinking about the background of how we're going to maintain these programs before we just release them to our end users to start creating. I've been the person that these programs just came out. I remember back when SharePoint came out. It wasn't as easy to do as it is now. It has gotten easier, but you still need to understand a lot of aspects. It's like building a website. So having that knowledge of being able to do some graphical things, because we're bringing in web parts, and then what information needs to go into each of those parts. Which apps do we want to be bringing in, and which page are they going to go in, or which site are the apps going to be accessible through? Do we need a OneNote notebook? How many document libraries is it going to have? Is it going to be on this page or this page? So these are all questions that you really need to be thinking about to make sure that you are going to be set up appropriately to be able to share the appropriate information. So when it comes to kind of an overview of the integration of these programs, Microsoft Teams, when we create a new team, we're creating a new SharePoint site. So just so everybody has that understanding. So when we create a team in Microsoft Teams, so just to make sure everybody has seen a team, I have a few different teams that you can see through this login of mine. I have an org-wide team in Microsoft Teams, and it's called Virtual Training Company. I could have access to vacation or PTO information that we need to kind of have posts or share files about. We could have wikis. We could have to-do lists, using to-dos or planners. We could have a separate Excel spreadsheet specifically related to that topic. But who maintains that? Who says who can create an org-wide where everybody in the company will be able to see it? Or who can create regular teams that are going to be private? And what information are you going to have inside that team? So what are we going to have out there for channels? And in each channel, what apps are we going to have going across the top for each channel? Are we going to be having any private channels? Like I have this private channel called Admin Guide. Which of my members from this team have access to the admin guide? And what tab should we have in this private channel? So there's a lot that can actually go into all of this. But if you look at my list of teams, notice the one called Clinic. Notice the team called Clinic. If you think back on being in that SharePoint site a minute ago called Clinic, I said that that was a team site. Here it is in Microsoft Teams. If I go to the general channel of this team, you're going to see files, the files tab. These are files that I have access to, of course, directly through the SharePoint site or here in Microsoft Teams. And people need to be trained on this is the same as the SharePoint site files. You know, we need to have people have that understanding. This also includes a channel calendar that is not accessible through SharePoint unless we need it to be. I also have a full service log where I could have a form that someone fills out. Is it available just here in Teams, or is this going to be available also in the SharePoint site? There can be different information in each location. If I go to vaccinations, as far as so when we're in this team called clinic, I have this channel called vaccinations. Just to show you, there's a couple of posts here, and then there's a files tab. Now I want you to kind of look at this so that when I go back into SharePoint, you can see that it's the same thing. It's actually the same thing. So I have this 2023 file, this Word document for the vaccination updates. If I go back to SharePoint, so let me jump back into my SharePoint site just to show you that if I go back into that, I'm in the clinic again. When I look at vaccinations on the left-hand side, if I click on vaccinations, I have a page called vaccinations. This is a page that I can have all kinds of detail to. So I can have document libraries. I have a calendar over on the right-hand side. I have my comments where people can come out here and put comments and somebody else can reply to them. So I have access to the vaccination information. But if I want to see the conversations that were done, on the left-hand side, I can go to conversations. This is going to take me back into Teams or to Outlook, depending on how I have things managed. So this took me into my Outlook, and it basically took me to, and I'm going to show you down here at the bottom here, I've got these groups, and let me go into the clinic group. So because I created this as a team, it created a Microsoft group. So we need to understand when we create certain SharePoint sites or Microsoft Teams, we're going to have group capability with that, which includes group calendars, group emails. So those are part of understanding these programs and making sure that we have the policies and the procedures with our governance to back this up. Because can I just share the email address for this clinic group to somebody outside of my organization? So what is going to be the governance security side for this particular site? We don't take enough time when we build our SharePoint sites or we build our teams to really think about the full features. We don't think about how are we going to maintain this, 1 week from now, 6 months from now, or 2 years from now. How are we going to archive old files or old data? How are we going to still be able to maintain easy access with more and more information getting added all the time? Do we periodically survey the users to find out what aspects of the site they are actively using? What reports can we run back in the admin side of Teams and SharePoint? And who's got that role and who's responsible for doing that? So I can't say enough about having a roles and responsibility matrix when it comes to SharePoint and it comes to Microsoft Teams. We really kind of need to be careful on not letting everyone create their own, because we need to have a little control on who can do what. because otherwise there could be confidential information that is being passed along when we don't realize it. It could be being shared with somebody outside of the company, So we want to be careful with that. So we want to stop and think about, when it comes to building Teams or SharePoint, which program should we be using for the information that needs to be shared? First, figure out what's the information. Who needs to have access to this information? Start there. Start figuring out what do they need to see. Then it will help you to determine, should this be a SharePoint site or should it be a Microsoft team and only a team where they don't go to SharePoint usually to access it? Because we don't need a home page like you're seeing right now for vaccinations. We could just go to Microsoft Teams and get the information instead, where we're going to have a post tab, a files tab, a wiki, a OneNote notebook, those types of apps to use. Do we actually need the full gist of all of this? Do we need all of the SharePoint bells and whistles? Or do we just want a place to communicate? We want to be able to do, posts. We want to be able to do chatting. We want to be able to do meetings, those kind of things. So we have to really kind of understand that backbone to how all that is going to work for us. Okay. So when it comes to, I'm going to kind of jump back to my PowerPoint here because I want to talk more about, kind of the overall of how these are all put together, because it's different apps that are going to be working with these programs. So yes, you're going to have SharePoint. Yes, you're going to have Teams, but what is being used with those? What are going to be our policies and procedures for working with Microsoft Outlook with these programs, or working with Planner with these programs, or whatever else it is that we need to have access to, or the users need to have access to? So we need to have somebody that has that role of that administrator. So when it comes to Microsoft Teams side of things, thinking about, which features are going to go into each of the different teams, which channels are going to go in there, all of these different great tools, but who needs to have access to which tools? So the admin roles versus the sub roles. So for Microsoft SharePoint and Microsoft Teams, who has the admin? And then who's going to be the person that's going to design them? Kind of do that building. Who's going to help plan these sites? Are we going to have a group of people together that are going to plan them? When we have end users coming into the picture, what rights do the end users have? What security levels do we have in place that is going to be used with those? I'm going to put myself on hold for just a second. Sorry. Sorry about that. So when it comes to these other roles, take a look and see what roles do we actually need to have based on your organization. Like I said, a lot of people are going to end up maintaining multiple areas. You won't have just one person that will do something. You might have one person do 14 things, depending on the size of your organization and, who or what it is that you have access to. So the handout that you will be receiving is going to have all of the information that I just mentioned. It's going to talk about kind of building this plan, making sure that you don't go through and just release these programs to your end users, because we don't want to make mistakes. Kind of pull back the reins a little bit and think about planning before you build. And what do we need to know about these programs before we can actually plan to use them? Who needs access to what? What security levels do we need? Lois, did somebody have a question?
No, actually, it's extremely quiet. I was hoping they were listening intently to you, so they didn't want to distract themselves by typing a question. So now would be a good time if they had one.
Yes. So there's going to be information in the handout, just so you know, about the SharePoint settings, kind of that background of going into what all needs to be maintained. It's going to talk about the permissions that I mentioned. It's going to talk about planning for governance for Microsoft Teams. What kind of decisions will need to be made? What kind of naming do we need to think about? Do we need to think about guest access? I give you several different hyperlinks as well to get into websites that will give you corresponding information related to each of these topics, whether it's directly going to be going to Microsoft's websites or it's going to another website. I have several links that you will have available to in your handouts. Think about the types of teams, think about the types of sites you will need. And the big thing is having a team together to help plan these SharePoint sites or the Microsoft Teams, and having the expert in the other areas like Microsoft Groups, who's the admin for Outlook, because we have integration to those as well. Having the documents, the documentation available, so that every time a new site gets created, we go to the policies and procedures and we follow what the plan is. We need to create that plan so they have a plan to follow. So take some time to really kind of think about putting together a governance plan. How are we going to handle certain situations? How are we going to handle, going live? Once we plan it, we build it, what happens when we go live? Where are they going to go to ask questions? Do we build into the SharePoint site a help form that they can fill out, or what phone number they're going to call? All of that needs to be determined. So all of that information is going to be in that handout that you're going to receive. I actually gave you a little bit more detail on each of the programs like Microsoft Teams and different things, but lots of different information that you'll be able to access through that handout. Okay. So Lois, let's go ahead and open this up for questions. If anybody has any questions right now, please, you could go ahead and unmute yourself, or you could put it directly in the chat if you would like to. Okay. So it doesn't look like we have any questions coming in. Now, of course, you do have the ability to reach out to CompuWorks after this session. If you do have any questions that come up, if you have specific needs, feel free to, of course, contact them. But Lois, do you want to let them know about the upcoming training that we have going on?
Sure. We just updated our training options. So next month, we're going to dive into Adobe Acrobat. And again, all of these can be registered through the link when we send you the email, or you can go onto our company website and find the training library and upcoming webinars links there. Then in March, we're going to do Teams Beyond the Basics. I think it was just only a couple of training sessions ago we started with Teams Basics, so everyone should be ready for Beyond the Basics by March. Then we're going to dive into Microsoft Planner in April and round it out with SharePoint Beyond the Basics in May.
And the Teams, the Planner, and the SharePoint topics that they have coming up correspond with what we were just talking about, the governance side. So definitely some great sessions coming up that they have to offer for you. So take advantage of those.
And as you can see, the time says 2:45. That's assuming everyone has a bunch of questions that need to be answered. So realistically, it's only an hour of your time. That's well worth it.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us here today. And watch for the email to come out with the link to the recording as well as the handout.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. See you next month.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, Lois. Great job.